Bonjour à tous et à toutes et bienvenue dans cette nouvelle édition et ce nouvel épisode de Parole à l'expert. Donc c'est Jalal Bouabdallah. Donc aujourd'hui c'est un peu tôt mais c'est pour la bonne cause et surtout j'ai un invité de renom. Euh, Welcome everyone to a new episode of Parole à l'expert, your monthly deep dive into the most critical issues shaping our digital future. Today, conversation goes beyond apps, devices, and platforms. It's about power, who hold it, who control it, and how it's shifting as our lives become increasingly mobile and connected. We are going to talk about mobile data, digital trust, and sovereignty, three forces at the core of the next digital revolution. To explore this with nuance and global insight, I'm honored to welcome Dario Betti, the CEO of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, a leading global trade body that's been shaping industries and practices, anti-fraud measures, and digital innovation for the past 25 years. Together, we will discuss how mobile data is changing uh, the nature of trust, what new security challenges we are facing, and whether sovereignty is it still possible in a world where data knows no border. So let's get into it. And Dario, welcome, and thank you very much to accept the invitation.
Thank you. Merci. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm afraid I can't speak French very well, but I love a language. You'll have to deal with an Italian speaking in English for today. It is certainly a pleasure to be here. I wouldn't miss it.
It's a pleasure to have you. Welcome, welcome. So, Dario, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and our audience?
With pleasure. So as you mentioned right now, I'm the CEO of a Mobile Ecosystem Forum, which is I probably would say it's a trade association. It's a non-for-profit. We have 250 members, which they vary across the ecosystem, hence the names. And they would have included mobile operators, which we do have as technology vendors, solution vendors, but banks, retailers, because by now the mobile part of the world is really encompassing multiple use cases, multiple players, and the complexity of this use chain usually makes people look around at each other as who's in charge about what. And so I think we need a forum, that's what we are, to talk to each other, to discuss at neutral place, to bring up some of those key questions you were raised are there, some of those theoretical, but some of the really practical things as well we could do today. So I'm very happy to be here representing that community. Before, I used to work as a mobile operator and an analyst for all of my sins. So I'm happy to share my experience here. But I think let's see what questions you might have. I think the last few months already have changed everything considerably. I started
a lot of things have been changed in this the last few months, I think, in the world.
And my career spans for over 25 years or something, and I think I can't use very much of that 1990s experience. By now, everything seems to be a bit different. However, there is some value in referring back at the old times every now and then.
Thank you, Dario. So let's start. I would like now just to tell you. So everyone say that there is something that came every time, and people ask me. So your phone knows more about you than your passport, but who does it tell? So why? So sometimes you take your phone and he knows more things, and you said that your phone is thinking or he's reading what is in your mind. So why mobile data is unique, contextual, real-time, behavioral?
That's certainly true. Well, first is because the idea of a mobile phone works so well, it became a personal thing. If you go back to a long time ago, the expectations were only about 10% of the population would have a mobile phone and use it sparingly. What the analysts in the 1980s, 1990s did not imagine is that it would become a personal instrument, and the importance of the internet to access all services. So by now, as you were mentioning, it does include a passport. We have seen Apple new announcement that your data for driving license, for passport, will be included on a mobile phone effectively. But it does include your banking details because you're doing banking on your mobile phone. It knows what kind of news you're listening or watching because your applications for deliverables are tracking you. Social media checks who you know, etc., etc. So by now, from the social to the work to the actual functional elements, the mobile phone, here's a place where you're actually using all of those. So the data that collects through the mobile phone is quite rich in telling you a lot of things. Now, what we don't sometimes think about it, because that's a data that you as a user would be actively creating something. You're doing things on the mobile phone. There's a lot more of data, which is very telling, which is very good because it can be used for lots of good things, but it's happening in the background and wasn't necessarily even thought about by users. It's just how the mobile phone would work. Where are you? So that I can connect your mobile phone to a mast nearby, or what's the temperature like, or what's the weather. In some conditions, mobile operators have collected all of this information, including information that your phone would know by now. My phone knows if I'm falling, or things at least, if I'm running, if I'm cycling, how fast I'm going. Am I going up or down? What's the altitude? What's my pulse? All of those things put together give such an intimate view of your life, which potentially was never reached before in life. So two school of thoughts, and some people say that which one is a more important, or etc. I think the combination of the two are very important. Already social media knows your emotional state potentially much better than a lot of people around you, just because things you do, how quickly you touch and so on, some of those links. So I think we should probably be careful. Both of them are extremely powerful, and we haven't seen the full use of those. And as I said, it could be very positive. It could save life, but could also put people's life and emotional status at risk as well. And I think we as an industry, we as a society, probably need to ask some of those tough questions you were referring to. Who's got this data? What is used for? And what's the right for society to say what it should and should not be done with it?
There is something that there's some repliques that I use, and everyone know them. We said that data is the new oil, but in mobile, I think it's extracted. It's extracted in real time, silently, constantly. This is what you said. And when something is free, you're not the customer. You are the product, and we have heard it before. But mobile, I think now, but mobile make it truer than ever.
Absolutely. I like the metaphor, but it's scary sometimes because
Yeah,
there is a finite resource of oil in the world. And I'm not sure that we have defined that the mobile data or data in general would be finite. There is a lot more is coming. Interestingly, if you're running an AI service, you probably would think that you want more and more and more, and more is, and you're trying to get more information to base your language learning. But overall, the amount of data is getting to stratospheric numbers. You're right that you can make a lot of money, you could waste a lot of money, and we've seen the hype cycle until a few recent before we talked about AI or machine learning, we were talking about big data. And it was interesting how some people made some very decent amount of money. A lot of people started collecting data for the sake of collecting data because if at one point it would be useful. Well, potentially with AI it might be, but realistically they spend a lot of money keeping things that they didn't know what to do about. Which goes back to that little metaphor. Potentially people were buying land, not data, trying then to find out if there was something to drill in and to be lucky with. So I think we need to change the idea of data as a Far West where everybody can try and get some, and land grab is probably what I would refer to what specifically is data. Well, who owns it is going to be very difficult as a question, but that could be part of it. But also, what are we using data for? Are there some limitation we want to use? What are the principles to apply to that?
So what makes mobile data more powerful or dangerous than the other data types, Dario?
Well, interestingly, some of the threats have always been there, I should say. Privacy or fraud in the history of telecom have always been there. Now, the amount of data and fraud we've seen has exponentially increased, and we have data for that. Now, interestingly, I think that's potentially for two reasons. Follow the money. Mobile phone and mobile phone technology was really, very good for your privacy circuits, but did not open the banks, with passwords. Did not allow you to check your all of your data on your health or things like that. And those would have required you potentially even just listening to conversation throughout the life of somebody on all the phone calls we were having in the 80s or 90s would have not given all of that information. But today, it is possible. With by accessing that data, you might find ways to get much more information, all of the information. So I think the threat have always been there, but the value of services as everything has moved to digital is now so high that we've seen so many more people that are constantly trying to attack and find ways to get into it.
So, who currently benefits the most from this data, and who should, from your perspective now?
Well, potentially, these might sound controversial, but I don't think it really is. The users are the ones that are getting the most out of data. We've asked that. So every year at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum for the last 11 years, soon to be 12, and we've asked, it's currently 17 countries in the world, cover 65% of the world population and more, 59%, if not more, of the GDP value. So pretty extended. And when we asked, there are two things that is worth of notice. Were they happy with how the data was shared? Well, about 5 years ago, the majority of people started saying no. It was almost a 50-50, but we had the element of, well, I'm not sure what's happening behind it. But if I ask, they were getting value out of the things, they say, oh, yes. It went plateauing for a bit. And then the last year is where people started really being more positive about data in general. And interestingly, if you look at why, it's the emerging economies, the ones that are experiencing economic growth, which is partly linked to digitalizations, mobile phones, etc., that are saying, I'm happy to pay for this. We still think that we value different things. The knowledge of what happens with the data, I think it might be patchy with me, and I'm supposed to be looking at it. So I think the entire industry might still have to have some fundamental questions. But it is true, and we should acknowledge that the users are currently not just getting information for free, as you were saying, by paying with their data, and they seem to be happy about potentially knowing some of the long-term consequences. Yes. Now, who's coming next is interesting, and that's probably the answer is people are questioning is to say, well, is it a lot of international companies or mostly American companies that are collecting this data? Where is infrastructure? So where is the economic power behind that? Are we allowing some companies to become the only, if not the major players in certain areas? Are we allowed only some infrastructure to be linked to that? And that's where regulatory powers are seen, and some big questions have asked. I would probably compare the European Union stance by saying on AI, for instance, putting a clear focus on privacy and protection of the users, which pretty much have said we don't want these services. Equally, it's a cost. We're saying we're not going to be participating in this weaponized world of data, where it might be a lot of other international companies that will grow large, Chinese and American, that will grow large models and will be able to have an advantage. So economically, we're seeing a shift, and who still got the good data is to be seen. But there is a question in the industry as well, which is a long-term question, is do you then protect the consumer for what they do not perceive yet as a threat, but might become a threat in a few years? Or that's a European model, or do you say, oh, let the innovation get loose, and then we will then intervene potentially later? Though might that be too late? We'll see.
Exactly. So now, is the user still consent? Still, is the user consent still meaningful in today's mobile ecosystem, or not? When you see all this.
Lovely questions. And first is, what is consent? is like one of the key fundamental questions. I'll look at the US, which is a bit more of a litigious market, but where you had a regulator trying to define it, the Federal Commission for Communication. And recently, without legality, their role has been diminished. So that consent is currently fought day by day. What it is, what is expired, what is include or not, in courts and battles. So I think, is consent when you write, when you say yes to terms and conditions? Most people don't know what that is. Is consent the legitimate interest that you might see in some website? I would challenge it. Would the old cookies, which we used to be in browser, represent consent? I don't know. Realistically, consent is very difficult to identify and rarely been truly used in the industry, in the internet today. I think a lot of things happens without users knowing, and sometimes it's very difficult even to say. Sometimes telecommunication company, even companies with dual data, do not even know that they are collecting data, because it's kind of a secondary data I was referring to. So all of that makes it more important for us to have this debate, first of all, and secondly, to identify again some of the rules. The focus in the legislation until now here wasn't about really which data are you allowed to collect, and I think that's very healthy. But I think with AI, it's not only that. Back to the fact that you might not generate data yourself, but somebody else might have generated some data that is relevant to you, and people could patch it all, put it all together, and create a profile. Even if I say do not consent, something else will identify me, because everything around it can provide some fingertip, some traces of me. And now that's where you still need to at least identify it. Hence, we're moving towards the new legislation is, okay, what are you using this data for? You might have data which might be even without consent, but the real question is also is this data going to be used for something? Is it harmful? Is it infringing privacy rights, etc.? So I think both things need to develop much more. One is, what is consent? What are the tools to make consent properly understood by the user and being able to action on? Back to our survey, when we asked, do you feel that you can do stuff about it, to the people, most people are saying, I'm not sure I really have the right tools to manage my data online. I don't even know where to go. I mean, equally, there are tools, but rarely they are the magic wand that will make yourself secure and private in the data world. So I think there is an entire discussions on how to make consent, both from legal point of view and from a practical point of view. Users, their models are there, but they haven't been yet successful, let's say, to the mass scale. And then finally is maybe you need to look at other things as well. It's not just consent, but is how to use your data for what, or how to let other people use your data for what.
I think now that we are more talking about data, and in the beginning we said that is the behaviors, the how we work, how we are using it. So I think there is also the metadata, which is now is power of mobile metadata. I think it's superpower, and until now we don't even know who is wielding it for now.
True, and it goes back to some companies are sitting a lot of data that they have no idea what it is or how we could use it for. But with the fact that AI has got the processing powers, and we're talking not all of AI, it's a bit of hype, but that really is a key of changing things. If you're sitting a lot of data, but you let your computer troll over it, eventually that computer could create patterns which we haven't, and to a faster degree that we have not thought until recently. And I think that's where really we started realizing that metadata, as you say, could be a new chapter. Some of these metadata does not require consent. Realistically, it's just part of it, almost the mechanics of doing things, of running a mobile phone network or running a banking application. Yes. Yet it's there. And what are we going to do with it? And what are the rules about it? You need to implicitly, that's a real implicit consent. By using a service, you need to let the service run your data and do things. Open an account, close it, checks, doing things, who you're sending money to, etc. from the banking world.
Exactly. So this
How
is
much of that is your data at that point and somebody else, or just a system that needs to know and keep it for even for private records for your own safety, etc.
so this is what make us to go to the like the second axis of the discussion, which is more about security vulnerability in the mobile ages. But I think you would like to continue your talking.
I'm happy to go wherever you want. I mean, security is potentially the biggest topic in mobile right now. And I say biggest, it would be bigger than AI or anything else, which is pretty exciting right now.
Exactly. Now we are seeing a lot of common attacks, vectors, and rising fraud cases in the mobile, as you said, and the challenges of securing fragmented mobile ecosystems. I think there are also some roles of the telcos and CPaaS provider in resilience. So, what are the blind spots in mobile security today?
I don't know, again, if it's very controversial and so on, but I'm going to say first, there's no blind spot. Everything is a blind spot almost.
Okay. So everything.
If you are looking, I mean, consider nothing secure is the starting point now. And it goes back to what we we're talking about. The amount of attacks have grown exponentially, and they are testing every single barriers. Now, if I have to say, the biggest threat right now, and controversial as it might be, but it is still true, is humans. As us humans, either because we are socially engineered and we respond to things of fright and so on in a certain way which is not rational. If somebody can tell me, oh my god, all your money's been stolen, do something about our mobile phone, I would
I
immediately
think
go,
now
no, I need to do something.
yes, I think the biggest vulnerability in mobile now is the isn't the device, it's the device itself. No.
I think it's a user and what it does with it, but
Okay.
the problem is you cannot change humans, and so we need to appreciate and we cannot ask all of them to become unemotional rational machines that would recognize a fraud which is on purpose trying to use our emotions to make them do something which is quite doesn't matter if you're a university lecturer or somebody with less money or education, you would all respond to some of these attempts in the same way. So first of all is we understand that we have our personal element to act in it. We are the weakest link. However, we are, as humans, we probably need to accept ourselves for what we are as well. The real question then goes is, first, defend yourself, but then what kind of things are happening right now? And because the biggest threat to the technology side is that the internet was built as a great thing, which was a private network where nobody would necessarily need to be anybody to go and access all the information. So identity was not built into the internet. And the biggest threat is identity impersonification and so on, getting your passwords. Getting to pretend to be you so that they can access something else. And this is a challenge for everything. Interestingly, the mobile phone might have built on something else. It does have a SIM, which is this security module. And so much that the industry, or lots of the industry, let's say the banking industry, for instance, my banks would not accept me to do a transaction over internet without checking that I'm really myself on a mobile phone, which is great. Until when you realize blind spots that everybody's now trying to hit the mobile phone and trying to unlock the potential of the mobile phones. And it turns out that the technology, the networks have been built on layers, strata layers. And one of them, for instance, SMS, which is now used for confirming your identity a lot and has been very successful at doing that. But that technology has been built fundamentally on something from 1977, which was not built with a level of security threats in mind that we have right now. So, well, careful. If you only rely on SMS, somebody might be able to interfere, and not just SMS, might even listen to your calls. How likely is that? Not necessarily. I wouldn't be afraid of that in my life right now about people trying to do that as much. However, it will be true, and it will be true for somebody or for certain transactions. Let's do the other examples. Well, let's forget telecoms. That's an old fashioned. I will use WhatsApp. I'm afraid
Okay.
that WhatsApp is finding right now a very difficult time with a lot of fraudsters trying to attack those. And it tells everybody, which has got an end-to-end security system, which is a great thing. So theoretically, my device will talk to another device or another company, and that communication will be secure. They made big advertising about it, which some people will feel much more secure, until you realize that some state or some companies, and recently some journalists, have open PDF files without realizing, and that PDF file allow other people to spy on them, including their WhatsApp. So back to the theory of no blind spot. Everybody is a spot, because whenever you talk about something or something else, so the internet was not secure, the mobile phone was more secure, but then it's been challenged. Now the OTT that sits on the mobile phone, which is new security, they've also been challenged. And I suspect if we're going to build something else on top, other intelligent people will try and attack it to make it insecure as well. So the paranoid world of nothing is secure is unfortunately the best descriptions of what we're living right now.
So you mentioned WhatsApp. What do you think about this controversial declaration of Mark Zuckerberg in the beginning of the year, when he said that the CIA or the NSA can access all the discussion on WhatsApp? Given that the access.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, and that's why I would always say, I mean, by the way, that was largely accepted because it became a condition for operations for WhatsApp and other solutions in some markets. So the end-to-end encryption, which is being told in some devices, Apple is famous to say we have no control over it and so on, had to be unraveled for certain things. In the old times, back to it, it used to be called legal intercept. And it was a condition for you to run a licensed telecom network that the legal, meaning the police, would come and potentially be asking to have access to those things. And there was a process perfectly identified in the, sometimes perfectly, sometimes less perfectly, identified in the regulations, which said that's how it works. In some countries, you have to ask a judge first to give the police rights. In some other countries, it's possible day in, day out from the police to go and check you. So, but that's what it was before. And if you can imagine, government and regulations have been a bit upset about these OTT services, so much that they created ways to control some of it. And let's say some have been very demanding, and it is true that not everything that is portrayed as secure, back to the paranoid, would be necessarily secure. And for sometimes for very good reason. Let's remember, that's your tools to find sometimes terrorists or organized crimes. It gives me a little example that I, apart from the WhatsApp world, is so because these apps were a bit more accepted and government had a role, some of them, let's say, then other apps, Telegram to start, or others have been created, up to a point that the organized crime used specific unknown apps to use it for very secure reasons, to allow their different people to communicate in what they thought was extremely secure. So not even using some of the famous words. And that's where the CIA created its own app, and to be used by the organized crime, which is an interesting point where the CIA then creates an app which is being partly used by activity that have been illegal, and they
illegal organization to control them,
only to at the end get some of them in jail. That's true, but there's a wonderful book about it, and if you ever want, we'll share some.
Yes, it will be good to mention after.
But the entire story is some big questions. Is where is the limitations? Because it's like any covert operations, some people, but effectively the CIA was supporting some illegal activities, and that's true if you send somebody to work inside, or in this case, if you run an entire applications to let criminals organize what they have to do. So you're right. Is it telecom? Is it a large OTT? And is now specific applications? But all of them have got real questions behind it, and you can never check, or you never know exactly if the state might be involved there or not. And I'm the kind of player that says, and I'm kind of happy sometimes a bit of a state is there. it might depend on whether by the regulatory frameworks of the cross balances and checks that each government might have. And that is another questions that I think we as an industry might want to have.
There is another thing. What are now the promising security innovation or standards that are emerging in the mobile ecosystem?
A lot, by the way, if you might have checked, even in 2 days, we go live, a big announcement, big acquisition. I think Palo Alto, if you know, has now acquired another cybersecurity company, and a lot of companies are going towards cybersecurity. Telecom companies are reporting cybersecurity and digital sovereignty, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, as the big driver of new revenues. Given they don't have a lot of new revenues, potentially this might be small, but yet worthwhile. So I think that the entire, a lot of the weapons are coming to. I'll pick some, if that's okay. And what I think is because we mentioned that identity is a real problem, and some of the limitations in one-time password or two-factor authentications, is biometrics. Now, great things, because all of a sudden, until now, devices were kind of being our key. So we trusted that these my devices, I have a password or something I know about myself, and this is something I own, and I can use that. Now we add another layer, which is here is some physical characteristic of myself, of my life, which I can use as another additional layer. Now, it's not very easy sometimes to use it. My phone doesn't seem to recognize me without glasses. I feel like I'm a Superman Clark kind of life. Just take them off, and it doesn't think I'm a same human. Or my finger on a different device, I still have two, and it's Android and iPhone. It doesn't always work. However, that's because they've been used for very generic services. But imagine that you want to qualify yourself with an important transaction, or verify yourself with the state, entering somewhere. Biometrics are used and are working. As always, nothing is secure. The biggest increase in threats we're now seeing is in fake identities.
So yes, exactly, fakes, especially now with the AI. They did all these AI tools then.
So whether it's your voice, whether it's your image, whether it's even your iris or your finger, the things that are happening there. So nothing that I'm telling you right now is to say that we are secure, but it's interesting to see how some new things are entering into our life, which we thought it was impossible until recently, and are adding another layer of security, and I welcome that layer. So I think biometrics is something that we're looking at very closely. The other things is the other side of AI. I mean, AI is what we talk about as a big weapon the fraudsters might be using, but AI can help us. AI is making sure that they know a bit more about us or what is happening, and taking some of the, at least let's talk about our flags. Flagging is something is not correct here. Is this device really where it is? Has this person ever done this kind of transactions? Are they where they're supposed to be transaction to be? Or is that device a fair list? And I think those are really starting to help, because it's kind of unboxing the traffic and trying to look at patterns and negative patterns a bit more. So one is a very internal things, the AI. You don't see it, you don't actually feel it, but it's happening more commonly. And the other one is a very touch and perceived things by consumers. Biometrics require you to do something, and it makes you feel a bit more empowered, which people like it as well. I think both of them are great to see and should happen. They're not going to be by themselves the only answers. Unfortunately, we need to find more stuff.
I think what I can understand, I think now, is that secure mobile ecosystem can't exist without shared responsibility between users, providers, and regulators. Do you agree on this?
I agree, and I'll add more the list, and probably true to the mobile ecosystem forum, the ecosystem part. We believe that if you ask somebody, are you responsible for things or no? It will be, for them, it will be difficult to say, but I think there's a collective responsibility and there's an accountability. And I think what we are trying to say is, whether you're not responsible, you're still accountable to be part of a solution. And the real challenge and the challenge of process of use is this fragmented ecosystem, which has been the success of a mobile ecosystem. You got a bank serving using somebody else network and somebody else solutions and another devices from somebody else. You put it all together and you create a great service that people are really happy to use it. But each one of them, between this relationship, there might be a little gray area of who does what or how certain things are done. And that's what Frost love it. I would say you're perfectly right. Regulatory work is one thing, mobile operators is another. Digital services, digital service providers would be another. Solution providers, which are in between, might also be, and then the users are list. So when we try to look some of these chains, we find that there are so many people involved. As a matter of fact, probably I should have mentioned that one of the biggest threat as well that we are currently seeing, which is not necessarily mobile, is to attack to the supply chain. So let's say that what we have seen recently, I'll probably say the retail. There was an attack in UK only a few months ago, which put up a large retailer here. But that attack was successful not because they attacked the retailer, but they attacked a supplier of a retailer. And the relationship right now between suppliers are so close to each other that they have get access to the overall infrastructure, IT systems, and so on of other players. So that kind of vectors is becoming more complex. It goes back to your questions, because everybody is so tightly
connected and everybody is related to. Just in few words, if we had to rethink mobile security from scratch, where would we start?
Identity.
Wow.
Well, one word. I hope that was it.
But one word, identity. I think it's very interesting. And then it's very important, as we are talking, a lot of people are talking about now digital identity. And this is what I think where we can start.
I agree, and I think because sometimes we're talking about great services of digital identity, but the fundamentals are a bit shaky. In some countries, the identity of a mobile phone is not an identity. You have a device which is identified, but not a person.
Not a person.
How do you know who's using that? But the other side, if I'm a user, how do I know that the person coming to me with an SMS, with a message, or even with a service, is who it really is, especially if it's a bank or if it's a government telling me something. There is no real service in mobile or in internet yet that allows you to have that kind of clear identity connections. I am Dario, and I'm talking to Jalal. And that we know that everybody is real, the person involved. That we assume that is working, but with assumptions, because of AI, because of the fallacies of our networks and so on, he's going to find it more and more difficult to be true. And I think we need to consider that very urgently.
Thank you. We talk about security, and let's go to our last axis, which is digital sovereignty and all this new geopolitics of data. Now we know that clouds have borders now. Can mobile sovereignty be more than a slogan?
Yeah, well, you keep the difficult ones. It definitely is a slogan. It also is. It definitely is a sense of direction for some of the economies. First of all, I think it's a nice counterbalance, because the flow of data was going one way, and some of the issues about regulations would not be able to apply in a country anymore, where international players running some of the digital infrastructure and digital services of the countries are not accountable for those regulations. I think that needs somehow to be balanced and managed, because it's a challenge to sovereign state in the first place. So I can see how that comes from. By now, we have different inclinations of versions of digital sovereignty. There's obviously a digital and services one, where it starts. And I think where potentially you still want some of the great services that have been economies of scale to build great things, and they're good for customers. But the
Okay.
second question was the data as well, and we seem by way European Union to say, well, we need to have a bit more of competition here again. But the US is happy with that, and China is saying, I will build my own, and I will just defend my own services, and I don't want to open up. 3 different models, but real behind that is data sovereignty, and I think that's it's slightly more interesting and potentially something you could really talk about and do now. And that is, well, you might be a company working from a different place and different countries, but let's say that I want the data for my customers to be run in a way which is within my framework, and so leave that data in my country, where physically in a virtual world it's a bit difficult, but try to make the model to be left within there, so you can only do things to citizens in this in this country if you're doing something. So I think the difference between digital services and data sovereignty is potentially very interesting, because data is more practical, difficult to do it. Infrastructure, I think that's a problem. Infrastructure is, unless you're talking about data and data hosting again, which is really where data kind of plays a role.
I was going to tell you, if the infrastructure is foreign, can the data truly be local? So
That's what, and in the end, because of the difference between data and metadata, which we talk about, you can secure data, but the metadata becomes always a bit of a challenge. So I think you have a practical element. You can actually say data needs to be stored here, data, personal data, let's say, but you're still not going to be covering everything else. However, it's in a way to say I will have control about my citizens' data and protect them or apply the roles within here. The other one is economic, because you mentioned it before, the oil metaphor, wasn't it?
yeah.
I think the real question behind some of those is, I want a bit of a slide of taxations or economics growth for my country by making sure that it happens. Now, that's more challenging and difficult, I think. And that's where I think some of the interpretation of digital sovereignty are probably going to fail, because they're trying to focus on the economic by itself rather than the defense, for protection, and the creations of new innovations in the industry itself.
I think now that we are seeing some regulatory fragmentation, Europe versus US versus China versus Africa, and this is what makes some power struggles between global tech players and sovereign state.
And it's a change of a globalization of the internet kind of themes, where everybody accepted that the internet was going to be a global beast and you had to be left alone. So there was a view of looking down at China or Russia for building this great firewall, and said you're not able to do it. It's interesting, because I keep on referring to the EU, because some of these legislative countermeasures, the US is very happy with status quo, because it pretty much says most of my companies are doing very well with this. But the European Union is the one that is starting to build, with the 2 acts, the Digital Service Act and Digital Market Acts, some tools that want to say, I want to kind of separate and introduce more openness in the market, let's put it like that, which for them also could be seen as, I'd like some European players have a chance of fighting this in this market. And the African one is also good, interesting, because or the Brazilian one, because it's trying to get trading between the platforms. You got a Chinese influence, but it's very happy to support and spend money in countries. European Union does not spend or has got an influence power, but is representing a potential bargaining chip on what you could do, start to create barriers, and then you can use it against the US players as well. So I think all of a sudden African players have got more say in what happens. Not that it's a nice or an easy trade, but you could bargain a bit more. And if you look at the recent tariff discussions, in quite a bit of a tariff discussion, there was an element of digital services discussions, and it was a bargaining chip. Do not do anything of that, do not tax this, do not limit this, but then you get something else. It is a much more of a litigious world, though, isn't it? You might have to get your voice heard and prepare a plan of action much more in this, if you're a government, that you haven't had to do before.
So we are talking about all these laws, all this let's say technology. What can be the role, or what role can industry bodies like the Mobile Ecosystem Forum plays in this geopolitical puzzle?
Well, I think MEF is, in its view, we are neutral, so we don't have a position, but we represent the last letter of a word, forum. Now, what we believe that our role is, and what is potentially really needed right now, is people talking to each other. And that starts with the three layers. The first one is understanding where people are coming from. It's not just understanding the news, but understanding what are the overall goals, what we're trying to do. And back to that question on digital sovereignty, it is, what are you trying to do? Is the economic growth that you're looking at? Well, it might be bargaining chip for other things. It is data protections you're looking for. It is infrastructure security that you consider, etc., etc. I think there are multiple ways. As long as you know, that can then create additional discussions, platforms, and impact, and so on. So I hope that our role is to create a bit more of an understanding of what's happening, or what's really behind the decision we're seeing, and what are the road towards managing those. There is a bit of optimism. I think people are trying to do good things, accessible for us. Let's. But a lot of the government, sometimes the industry is trying their own version of a good thing. But there is a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding, even technical misunderstanding of what is possible, what is not possible, and that's why I think everybody would, I think, enjoy the things that you're doing here. And not just with me, obviously, but inviting people, inviting the reflections of what's happening. We all need to understand a bit more of this new, dynamic, developing world that we're living in. And that involves not just us as a person, but companies, governments.
So how do we balance global standards now with local values?
Yeah, and I think that the global standards, by the way, which is a very telco structure, telecom have built global standards, and they're proud of it. And they got trashed by non-global standards, but de facto standards, which were faster and easier to produce and generate economies of scales. So I would say that the global standards have now been threatened by single platforms. And by platforms, so we talk about the large US players, I would say, that build the devices, the services, all of them coming together. I think global platform standards might have a new role to play, especially when it's about security processes and so on, and we might want to review. So our view, MF, we don't do standards, but we welcome a lot the discussion on standards. The reality has changed, and it needs to include private companies and their own solutions to make it reliable and possible. Now that's the first step, which is we need to understand the standards are not what they used to be.
So, last question: how should businesses navigate this regulatory complexity now?
Well, I would say regulatory complexity is one, because definitely you're right, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Let's put it that we just leave. So expect more of that. I think that before my message, and I was sorry, apologies for not answering your question straight away, but I said before you even talk about regulatory complexity, just consider that security is now your main focus. Regulation by itself will not protect you enough. Now, you need to be compliant. That's a different thing. But you need to be internally compliant with the security standards. Again, the majority of security attacks right now are happening because silly things were not done. And back to your question as well. So, and then on compliance, I think the world, which was a very geographically flat world before, you could go everywhere, and you might decide which regulatory or compliance framework you want to favor. So you can first serve that. And once you have built the economies of scales, we can then jump in. It's going to be a bit less about globalization and more about regionalizations, I think.
I think now sovereignty in this digital age now it's not just about laws. I think it's about capacity, independence, and resilience.
Absolutely, which is why I think back to sometimes making a law, you need to understand the trade-off, which is exactly what you were saying. I mean, by digital sovereignty, are you limiting your companies in your jurisdiction as your people as well to some of the activities out there? So there is that element. Are they making them a bit more vulnerable to attacks? Do they have redundancies? Do they have multiplicities of things? That's all part of the same considerations. I'm not saying that digital sovereignty is a bad debate, but it's a complex debate. And when it needs to be approached with a bit of a caution of understanding the long-term consequence of some of the choices we're making.
So thank you very much, Dario, for your answer. And we arrived at, I think, at the end. So what's your last words for this session?
We covered so much, which would be very difficult to find a proper element. But let me try with one message only, if possible, which is it's the beginning of something different, but it always has been. Now, the pace of change might be faster than in potentially any life I've experienced so far, but the trends are the same. We should not be scared about the amount of change. As long as we keep, those key principles is what are we trying to do? What are our objectives? What are we trying to do? We have better tools. So it's not a negative view of the world. It's just we need to adapt to this world, not necessarily to run away and say it's never going to work. I'm still an optimist. It's just that there are lots of things we need to work about.
Thank you, Dario, for your clarity, your insight. It was and your global perspective on these deeply complex issues. So, my dear audience, we have seen today that mobile is no longer just a tool, and it's a geopolitical, economic, ethical frontier. The way we govern mobile data, secure our devices, and shape our digital sovereignty will define, I think, the next decade. So if there is one thing to remember is that digital trust is not technical feature, it's societal contract, and rebuilding it requires collaboration between tech, policy, and also people. This is the main important things. So to our audience, if you found value in today's exchange, don't just listen, question your data practices, push for better standard, and be part of the conversation. And this is Parole Expert, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, Dario, for having accepted my invitation. Again.
Merci.
Merci à vous. Donc, je vous dis à très, très bientôt. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été ici et je vous dis à bientôt.